Mr. Hines says we can get going now.
All right, we're recording now, so if you could state your full name and the rank you left the military.
Sure. Yeah, Donald Sharpe Pickard, and U.S. Air Force retired. I retired as a lieutenant colonel, although I was a colonel. You had to have 3 years in grade to retire in rank, and I got out after a few weeks of being a colonel. They wanted me to quit flying, go to the Pentagon. Anyway, enough said. Go, son.
All right. Well, how did your family feel and react to your decision to join the military?
Well, it's a little complicated. My dad died when I was 12, and as I kind of mentioned to you, I started out in the military right out of high school because I didn't have any money to go to school on, and I got a competitive appointment to the Naval Academy, but was cut during the down select at Bainbridge, and so I volunteered to go on active duty. My mom, I was an only child. My mom was a single mom, so it wasn't a lot of family reaction. And then from there, stayed in the Navy for 2 years, stayed in the reserves while I went to college, got my degree from NC State, volunteered to go back in the service, and went to pilot training and stayed in there for now. So I had basically 6 years as an enlisted man and 21 years as an officer.
What made you want to join the military?
My dad had been a civilian pilot, and I had always, and I grew up as a little bitty kid during World War II, and so watching the war and the stories and the people in my family, and one of my neighbors that lived right behind me was a fighter pilot, and we all thought the world of him, so that was the guy to emulate. So that sort of pushed me down the road.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time
Yes.
of entering service?
Well, we ended up getting married,
Oh.
which was why I changed from the Navy to the Air Force, because I spent 26 months out on aircraft carriers out in the ocean. That's not a good thing for young marrieds.
Well, how did she feel about you entering the service?
Very supportive, no problem.
What was your most memorable experience?
Oh gosh. I guess would be from the Air Force. You're talking military type experience, of course. I would happen to be the reconnaissance, one of the 2 reconnaissance pilots on the first big day we went back North Vietnam in 1972, and we were up there about total about 3 hours from the time we left Thailand, refueled, went in, flew the mission, just let them go, flew the mission, and we had, I think that day they said we had something like 300 or 400 surface to air missiles shot at us. So that was pretty memorable. We lost, we went up with 18 airplanes, and I think we lost 3 or 4 out of our group.
What was your worst experience?
I think the worst experience was being away from home for long periods of time in training and otherwise. And then in Vietnam, we came home when we had 100 missions up north, and I actually ended up sort of splitting that 100 missions over more than normal. But I was over there about a year total, in 10 months, getting my 100 up north.
If you had the choice, would you do it again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, it was a bit of a risky business at times, but it was extremely gratifying and, quite frankly, a lot of fun. And most of the time, that old adage that you've probably heard a million times, flying in general or flying a fighter in particular is about 2 or 3 hours of boredom and about 10 seconds of stark terror. And that can be true when things don't work right.
What would you do differently now that you can look back on your experience?
I can honestly say I don't know that I would do anything different, because all worked out for me. I had a lot of hesitation getting out early because, again, I'm not sure. My wife wasn't real sure whether she wanted me to retire from the Air Force when I did, because I had just made full colonel and was going to a desk job. But that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So at that point, I made a jump shift to a Lockheed Aircraft Company, actually to Fairchild. They were bought out by Lockheed, but it all absolutely worked to my advantage all the way around. So I can't complain at all. I have nothing but good things to say about the military.
How were you treated by your superior officers?
Very well. Again, I went all the way from an E1 to an E5 and then an O1 to an O6, and that's a broad spectrum of 06, a colonel in the Air Force. That's equal to a captain, ship's captain in the Navy, and I had command of my own unit, and those, it was a very, very, very memorable experience, and it prepared me for dealing with civilian life, because coming out, I ended up going into management with Lockheed, and quite frankly, I think my experience was that the military guys were, in many respects, far superior to the senior management in the civilian world. I had worse experiences with senior people in the civilian world than I ever did with military superiors.
It says here that you had 5 distinguished flying crosses. How would you achieve one of those?
They were all over in Vietnam. They were all on separate missions, doing the things we had to do over there. Again, I got all 5 of them doing recce missions. I got several air medals. I was in a composite fighter reconnaissance wing, and the reconnaissance mission, as you'll see if you look at that thing, is we flew fighter airplanes that were stripped down to take pictures, because in those days you didn't have satellites, you didn't have digital cameras. Everything was film, and the only way you really knew what was going on the ground or what the enemy was doing is to have somebody look. And this was especially true over North Vietnam, where we didn't have anybody on the ground, intentionally anyway. And so we basically, one of our patches, we had a Laotian Highway Patrol, and that's what we did. We took a very fast pair of fighters, one usually with cameras and one with rockets on it, and a couple of air-to-air missiles, and we would fly virtually all over North Vietnam looking for truck parks, traffic, what the enemy was doing. One guy fly high to cover, one guy fly low. If we found a target, we had guys loaded with bombs sitting on tankers, and we would identify the target, and then we had carte blanche to hit certain types targets anywhere within an area. I'll show you these maps at some point in time. That's what we used to use. We'd mark out the area we were going to search that day and go over and just run the roads, at 500-600 knots, but you're running right down the highway. And if you found something, the one with rockets on it would mark it, and we'd call and bring in the guys with the bombs and bomb it. It was a lot different than today, when they can, have a spy satellite sitting up there.
Do you keep in contact with any of your friends from the military?
Oh yeah. I usually I'm in 3 different military organizations: Red River Valley Fighter Pilots, TAC Recce Association, and then Squadron Association from the squadrons for the wing and squadron I flew in Vietnam. And I sort of alternate and try to go to one every year or two. And it's amazing, as we're sort of a dying breed, as guys are starting to go away already from lose a lot of friends already.
Mr. Hines is going to ask some questions.
Sure.
Then, I know you can stay for a little bit, Jonathan, then you have to head out.
All right, sir. In your experience in Vietnam, where were you based out of?
Most of the time out of Thailand, Udon Thani or Udon.
Okay, did you have to fly through Laos to get to North Vietnam?
Yes.
Was that ever a problem flying through Laos?
They tried to make it one. Depending on where. Certain parts of Laos or Laos were just, there was no real problem. But you never could tell. They would sneak guns in, and one of my most vivid memories is flying along in an early evening, heading back, and I thought I was home free. And I'm just sort of cruising along at about 20,000 feet, and all of a sudden I see a bunch of tracer shells coming up. I thought, I wonder who the heck they're shooting at. And all of a sudden those things turned and came at me, and it's me. You start bugging out. But
well, dealing with the anti-aircraft fire, they had the SAMs,
Mhm.
they had the AAA.
right.
What were there any really other than that? Were there any close calls that you had?
Yeah. Quite a number. Like I said, I flew 100 missions up there, 173 total during the war, and you got shot at it virtually every mission. Now, the thing that the surface-to-air missiles were the most thought-provoking threat because you planned for those. But what really killed the most people was ground fire. The MiGs weren't very much of a problem. I got bounced 3 different times, but it was always them trying to ambush you on the way home, and it was you just generally do a couple of turns with them and then bug out. I was never in. We had a specialized squadron for air-to-air that had different airplanes that had different types of equipment on them for picking out who was the enemy and who wasn't. That was a big issue up there because of you had so many airplanes from the Navy and then ourselves going in that not shooting your own buddies down was an issue.
Sure. So, was everybody flying F4s?
No, not all. In fact, when the North Vietnamese came down in early '72, in the spring of '72, the Navy didn't have any capability to do blind bombing, and the weather was bad. That's why they came down at that time, because they shut down air power, and they were streaming across the northern part of South Vietnam, southern part of North Vietnam. And the Air Force, we had a thing, especially in our recce airplanes, Loran, same ones, like you have on the boats. And that was kind of primitive in airplanes, but we would go pick up Navy fighters and fly them in, go in with 4 guys on each wing, and you just tell them when to dump their bombs.
That's interesting. With the, you're saying that the different aircraft had different roles and different equipment on it. Did you consistently fly the same type of aircraft with the same equipment, the same type of mission?
No, not entirely. Generally, you specialized. When I was over there, I was a fairly experienced pilot. I probably had about 2,000 hours, and I was a senior captain. And I ended up in what we call standards, Stanaval, which you check other pilots. And so I was assigned to the wing, but I flew out of the 14th Squadron for recce, and I flew what we called Atlanta Laredo, which was fast vac, which was running the roads. Okay. But we had 3 different kinds of airplanes. We had recces, and with each of those there's a subset with special equipment. But we had recce airplanes, which were basically the fastest. They're stripped down F4 Phantoms with cameras and a few other goodies on them for intel. You had the D model F4, which was the earlier ones that had no gun, and it was basically used mostly for dumb bombs. Then, right at the end of the war, we started getting smart bombs, and usually we had those on specialized aircraft that had laser designator. And then the last time, F4Es and some airplanes that were called Combat Tree that had a special radar that could identify an enemy airplane better than anybody else. And the F-4Es and the specialized F-4s would do air-to-air. So there were 4 basic missions and about 5 different types of F-4s involved.
Did they ever put guns on the F-4s?
Yes, the F-4E had a Vulcan 20 millimeter cannon.
Okay, just kind of curious.
And they also had the D models. Occasionally they tried putting pods, gun pods under the wings, but it never really, too much drag, took the fuel away, took the fuel tanks away, so you didn't have any range and et cetera. Wasn't that accurate.
With your, you're saying you're going on 100 missions. I saw in your write-up you were part of Operation Linebacker.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And did I see Rolling Thunder on there?
Rolling Thunder 2, which was the second part of Rolling Thunder, and then Linebacker.
So how did those missions differ? Because those are big operations. How did those differ from, obviously, instead of just going with 2 aircraft, how did your role differ when you were part of those things?
Well, let's talk about the recce role, because I spent a good most of my time in that role. Mm-hmm. In the recce, you had several missions, and again, I'll remind you that there weren't satellites up there. There were no weather satellites. There were no comm satellites. So we had these special airplanes that had high-frequency HF radios, long-range radios, stripped down for speed. You'd send one of those up if you were going to bomb. Let's say, I'll tell you my most memorable mission then for that sort of thing. I managed to do 2 or 3 things in one day. I was supposed to be the weather check for the raid on the Tai Nguyen steel mill in about end of May, early June of '72. And we launched off, and I had 2 recce's, because we always had 2 in case somebody fell out or knew what happened if the guy didn't come back. And my wingman aborted on the runway on takeoff. He didn't get one of his engines, didn't operate properly, so he stopped. I took off. Well, you weren't supposed to go up by yourself, so they sent 2 F-4Ds that used to sit air-to-air alert on the base to meet up with me and go with me. And of course, we'd never briefed, and it's all radio out. So we go to the tanker, and they have no idea where they're going. We're told on the ground to go up to the tanker, meet this guy, and do what he says. Well, filled up with gas, dropped off, and they're just flying regular show formation on either side, and I rocked them out. And all of a sudden, one of them we went right over Dien Bien Phu, the old airfield. We were going into North Vietnam. All of a sudden, they're out here, about 2,000 feet, jinking around. So went in and looked, and there was weather. So I called back, completely fogged over. Target's no good. Well, nobody shot at us much going in because they always wanted to see where you were going. Went to the tanker. I'm headed home now thinking my day's work's done. And these guys we haven't talked at all. No radio contact at all. And because I'm talking on HF, which they didn't have. We get to the tanker, and they said, weather forecaster says that he thinks it'll clear up in an hour. Just stay on the tanker and go back in and tell us what it looks like then. So now we're sitting up over northern Laos on the tanker. Go back in again. These guys, again, don't know. I move out, they stay with me, and I turn around and start going back the other way. And these guys are all of a sudden, I can see their eyes getting big because they're not used to doing this sort of thing, going in low altitude into North Vietnam. So we go back in again. Sure enough, the weather is cleared. We got a lot of ground fire this time because they kind of knew where we were going, and we flew the same route. Went over the target, got pre-flight or pre-strike pictures, went back to the tanker. I'm headed home now. Raid has been launched, and they're all up there bombing the place. They called me again, and they said the other 2 ship of recce's both aborted. So I went back in and got the post-strike. And this time I actually talked to the guys because now they knew what was going on. I said, they always knew recce was coming at the end because once they struck a target, within 15 minutes later there'd be a recce airplane over to see take pictures and see what happened. So this time I got them off on a frequency, and I said, you know, I'm not going to drag you guys all the way over the target again. I'll go get the target, and you meet me head on coming out, because they generally launch the fighters to try to intercept you on the way home when you were low on fuel. And we did that, and I came back. But anyway, I got one counter, no DF, and that was not a DFC, by the way. But I probably got shot at for a total of maybe 30 minutes, and got 6 hours of combat time on one mission.
That's amazing. When you were dealing with other, like the Navy and the Marine Corps aircraft, was there any kind of competition between the branches?
Not over there, because we didn't operate in the same areas. The way they had it divided is we took care of route packs 1 and 2, which were the southern, from the DMZ up past Dong Hoi and in that area, and we took care of western parts of the Plain de Jars up in northern Laos and Laos itself. Navy took care of Haiphong and route packs to the north of that generally, and the route packs between Dong Hoi area and Tai Nguyen and that area. So they had their area of operation, we had ours, and we sort of stayed out of each other's way. Marines used to operate with us. We used to have a joint, that Fast Fac I was talking about, they used to have one out of Da Nang called Gunfighter that used to fly with us.
Okay. When your tour was over, returning to the States, how was the American public greeting you and the military in general at that time?
Well, that's a sore spot. I came back in right before Christmas of '72. I got my 100 missions in the fall of '72, and I came back and I was strip searched in San Francisco airport on arrival.
Really?
Yeah. I flew into San Francisco. They took me commercial to Hawaii. I got a flight from Hawaii to San Francisco, and then military took me to March Air Force Base, and I went down to get a flight back to South Carolina, where my family was, and it was not a pleasant experience. I was not a happy camper.
I bet. Once you finally got back to South Carolina, it's kind of a different area than San Francisco. Was the town? What town are you from in South Carolina?
Well, I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, okay. But I was stationed at Shaw Air Force. My orders coming back were at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, which was a small military town, and it was not an issue.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Looking back, do you think and I know you said it was a sore spot. Do you think the attitude has changed toward Vietnam vets since then? Oh, sure it has. Well, we weren't we were actually advised, even when I was in England in later 70s. I went back to Shaw and then over to England in '74, and was over there for 3 years. And during that period of time, which was I don't want to get political, but during the Carter administration, they didn't want us flying in uniform. You had to wear civvies to fly. And that changed a lot in the '80s. I was back in Europe in the '80s, and the whole rules changed, and the military came back up. In the '70s, when I was in England, we were even having our boots resoled. This is an honest story. We used to go cross country, and the tires were so worn. When you got down to so many layers of tread, the aircraft tires have red tread. Have a red cord in there so that you could tell when it was having to be changed. Yeah. And that was a grounding item if you had red cord showing. And we used to always make sure we had a black grease pencil, so if we had red cord, we could go mark it out so we could get home. They wouldn't ground the airplane. You said that at one time you lost some planes in your mission over North Vietnam.
Yeah.
Did you have any friends that were captured?
Oh yeah, we had, my roommate was POW, Hector Acosta. I lost I lost 2 or 3 hooch mates, and my roommate was POW. He came home. But we had during that period of time, it was pretty dicey. We were in the recce business, which was especially took a lot of losses. I guess we lost. We had a 24 UE squadron with about 26 airplanes assigned, and we probably lost during that 10 months. We lost over half of them.
Were most of them taken prisoner, or?
No, most of them came back when you were shot down. When I say lost, not necessarily lost the crew. We had. I'd have to sit and do the math, but generally we got the guys back, or they became POWs. We didn't have too many killed outright because the F4 had a very, very good ejection system, and it was a tough airplane. Early on in the war, they had some problems because they had with canopy separation, and the seat wouldn't eject if the canopy didn't separate. So there was a technical issue that was solved, and after that, if you got hit, you were about 85%, maybe higher, of getting out of the airplane.
That's good. With that whole POW business, did you have to go through any special training?
Yes.
Did you have to go through SEER school?
They didn't call it that. Back then it was just survival school. You went to, going to Vietnam, you went to three survival schools. You went to one that was out in Fairchild, Washington. And that one is the one you read about would be the SEER type school. And you got, and yes, they did everything to me that they've done to these poor guys down in Cuba, except waterboarding. I guess they hadn't invented it for us at that point in time. I never got waterboarded, but I got slapped around, sleeping nude in a cold cell, music all night long. They did all of that to you, and you had like a 3-week course out there. First week was academics. The next week was escape and evasion, but they caught you immediately. You went through a live fire deal at night, and you always got captured at the end. They had you. They threw you in jail, interrogated you, kept you awake for 2 or 3 days. No food, no clothes most of the time. The interviewers were doing the best they could. I wouldn't go into classified stuff, but they do the best they could to imitate either Russian or North Vietnamese or Chinese interrogators in uniform, enemy uniforms. And I tell you, after about 2 or 3 days of no sleep and getting slapped around, you're beginning to wonder what the heck you were doing there. But they used to stress. They used to, one of the stresses were keeping you awake, loud music all the time, and they would fold you up and put you in what's a morgue locker, like you have on CSI where they bring the bodies out. They actually had one of those, and they'd put you in there and double you up and put you in the wall and leave you for a while, which would drive some people nuts. It didn't particularly bother me. And then we went out and did a 10-day escape and evasion. They put you in a POW camp, and then they either encourage you to escape or let you go. And then you had 10 days to get across northern Idaho to another location where you got to come home. They gave you start out with 10 guys together, and they gave you a deer, a live rabbit, and a big sack of potatoes and a big sack of carrots. And other than that, they had all what you would come down with in a parachute, and you were on your own. And like I said, they treated us. I get tickled to the people saying that, the things that they do, the terrorists down there. I'm sure bad things are done in any war, but they did the same things to us in training us.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your service with the Air Force?
No, had a wonderful time, and I'd encourage anybody to so inclined to make the military a career. I think it can be challenging, but it can be very, very rewarding. And if there's anything, I know I brought along some other things. If he want, I didn't know what he's doing. I just grabbed some pictures and stuff from. That's by the way, that's what I looked like at my 100th mission.
All right.
All right.
zoom in on that.
That is the fall of '72.
He's still a good-looking guy.
I didn't. And this is what you got for it. I'm sure y'all have seen those. When you get thrown in the dunk tank with all the slime. They had a whole water tank they just let out there and then throw bad things in it, and then throw you in it when you got 100 missions.
That's great. Well, thanks for coming in.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm gonna stop this recording.
Sure.
I would love to see
No, that
pictures.
video or pictures?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, John